Hi guys, and welcome to this video where we're going to go through some basics of the periodic table of elements, looking at what it shows us and how we can use it to identify patterns and predictions on elements. So let's start by looking at this simple version of the periodic table. Now, for anyone who's studying Key Stage 3 science, this is a little bit more complicated than ones you may have seen before, but this is the standard GCSE periodic table of elements, so we want to show you this early on to get you used to it. So let's start by looking at this line here. Now, the periodic table of elements doesn't usually come with this thickened line, but I've put it on today so that you guys can see a clear marker between metals and non-metals so that you understand where they are. So if we look at all of these elements here, these elements are our metals, okay guys? So there's a way of remembering which elements are metals and which elements are non-metals. And if we think about our metals and we think about that line, we would say that our metals are below the stairs. If you want to be really specific, they're on the left of the periodic table. If we were to look at our non-metals, these ones right here, what we could say is, and I'm going to colour in hydrogen as well because hydrogen is also a non-metal, is that our non-metals are above the stairs or on the right. So as you can see, we've got this split between our two types of element, our metals, which are here, and our non-metals, which are here. We also need to talk to you about the different parts of the periodic table. So I'm going to start by talking to you about the numbers on the top. Now, the numbers are the groups. These are our columns in the periodic table. And our elements are placed into these groups based on what they react with and their physical properties. So everything in group 1 will have similar reactions and might have similar physical properties, such as conducts electricity, things like that. We also have these here, our periods, which are our rows on the periodic table. And once again, there are patterns in these rows. So we see how melting points and boiling points change if we move across our periodic table like that. We can also see a difference in the size of the atom or the atomic radius. So what you guys need to remember as well is how we actually put our atoms of our different elements into order, and we put them into order using this number on the bottom. And the number on the bottom is called the atomic number. And the reason we use this is because it tells us how many protons are in an atom. And that number doesn't change for a particular element. So hydrogen always has 1. Helium always has 2. Neon always has 10. If neon lost a proton and had 9, it would become fluorine. If helium lost a proton and had 1, it would become hydrogen. So we have used this to organize our periodic table because that number for a particular element never changes. So we can use it as a very particular measurement, and that way we can pick which things are which elements. Okay, guys, so let's look at our groups in a little bit more detail. So I've already said this once before, but the thing to remember is when we put things into our groups, we put them in based on their physical and their chemical properties. So groups have these trends that you can describe, and you can then predict where something would be based on its properties. So for example, if it reacted with water in a particular way, you may be able to place it into group 1 and in a specific spot on group 1 based on how it reacts with water. So if we look at our group 1 metals, they get more reactive as you go down the group. So lithium fizzes and floats on water, whereas rubidium actually explodes when you put it into water. So you can see that they get more reactive. If we had another unknown metal and we put it in water and it did something in between these two, We could predict that it was somewhere in group 1 between lithium and rubidium. We could even be more specific if we reacted each of the group 1s and then compared it to how that one reacted. So as you can see, the groups of the periodic table, by grouping them by their physical and chemical properties, allows us to make predictions on elements that we haven't seen or that we don't know which element they are. You also can look at the trends in their meltings and boiling points. So if we look here, these are our group 1 elements. And as you can see, when you go down the group, their melting point decreases. And so we would expect the next few elements, rubidium and cesium, to also have a lower melting point. If we look at our group 7s, we actually see that their melting point and boiling point increases as you go down the group. So it might be that if we saw iodine next, iodine would be a solid, and so on and so on. So this allows us to predict what's going to happen and what we would expect to see from those elements. Okay, now earlier in this video I mentioned the periods of the periodic table having trends as well, if you're moving across the periodic table in that direction. So these are two examples of some patterns in our periodic table. This is period 2 and this is period 3, and this shows the melting points. And what we can see here is that in period 2 the melting points increase until you get to carbon, and then they decrease down from carbon. And if we look at period 3, we see something similar happening as well. The melting points increase until we get to silicon, and then they decrease all the way across to argon. That's a pattern, and it's actually a very similar pattern, because if we go back to our periodic table and we look, you can see that carbon and silicon are in the same group. So our melting point pattern actually changes at the same point on the two different rows. And that might allow us to then predict what we would think would happen in the next row down, and so on and so on. Okay, guys, so that is everything that I wanted to go through with you today about the periodic table. If you need to, go back, watch this again, and make any notes that you might need to help you with whatever you're going to be doing with your tasks today.